guys, it's your boy KB today, and today we're gonna be talking about healthcare in Canada and specifically coronavirus, what we are currently dealing with. In case if you don't know my background, I'm actually a medical lab technologist, and what medical lab technologist does is that anytime your sample gets taken from the doctor's office or your blood sample specifically, and pertaining to the COVID, anytime your swab gets taken, it gets sent to a lab where you have dedicated qualified individuals that actually test for these samples. It's quite interesting recently when the Ford government announced in Ontario that everyone should get tested for coronavirus. This is a very good news, but at the same time, we have to understand the complexity that comes with this. Because if you don't have the infrastructure and also the human resources in place, at times it becomes very challenging to meet these demands. Currently, on a global level, we have about 22 million people who have been infected with coronavirus. And the death rate is about 774,000. And you have a dedicated individuals behind the scene working 24 hours to make sure that you get your results on time. So in this video, I'm hoping to be able to educate you and walk you through the process, how your sample get tested and how it get analyzed, so you get a better understanding and a better appreciation for what is happening behind the scene. So let's take a walk through this. I'm going to be reading from my laptop. So this is the COVID-19 lab testing process. So the first thing that you do is that the sample is taken from a throat using a swab or your nasopharyngeal. So the swab goes through your nostrils and it has to go way deeper at the back so that you'll be able to get a proper sample over there. And the idea is to be able to extract any viruses that are in there so that you get a better sample quality. So what is the next step? The next step is once the sample is taken, it gets put into a nice container which has a preservative, or I would say a test tube. So what the preservative does is that it maintains the quality and the integrity so it can be able to get to the lab in a safe manner to be tested. So the next step is the sample courier, where the sample gets traveled to the lab. And what usually happens is that the sample has to be at a very specific temperature, at a very specific requirement so that the virus can get into the lab intact and very stable so it can get tested. The next step once the sample gets to the lab is that the specimen reaches the lab, and specifically MLT, they extract the viral RNA. So the goal is that once the sample gets to the lab, you really have to do multiple series of steps to really extract an RNA from the test tube. And the ideal is that if you don't really get this RNA, you won't be able to test for anything, because the RNA is actually the one that you're going to be testing for in this sample. So the next step is once the specimen reaches the lab, then during extraction, the MLT makes a very complex calculation for a master mix that will amplify the viral RNA. So in most times, some patients, depending how or what the stage you are within the virus, your volume of your RNA will be very low. So the idea is to be able to extract this RNA and amplify it. So the amplification process is the way to actually multiply the RNA. So when we put it in the machine, it will be able to detect these RNAs in the sample. So what is the next step? The next step is after extraction, the MLT must carefully pipette small amount of the sample into a master mix. So after the extraction, then we get another test tube where the samples gets pipetted into there to be tested. So now another step that we also do is once the sample is mixed, the samples are put through a PCR, and basically what the PCR does is that it detects whether the sample is positive or negative. So after the extraction, the next step is actually putting the sample through a machine called PCR. And a lot of people that have done sciences, they have used this technology at the university level, at the master's and the PhD level. So the PCR is a very, very complex instrument where it actually can extract this RNA and it does the analysis to tell whether the person is positive or negative. The next step is after the completion, the results must be meticulously checked by the MLT to ensure they pass quality control. So once your PCR does the test, that's not the end of the game. Actually, the next step that we medical lab technologists take is that we have to do a quality check to make sure that there is no false positive or false negative within your result. And we actually giving the accurate, precise results to the doctor that ordered the test. So we put it through a quality check where we check everything, possibly patient's history, everything, to make sure that whatever results that we're given is very precise and very accurate. So the next step here is when the results are transcribed, it goes into a report. And if positive, the MLT must notify the ordering healthcare provider and also the local health authority immediately. So once somebody tests positive for coronavirus, we don't just stop there. The next step is to be able to pick up the phone and call the patient's physicians to let them know that this individual tested positive. And also the next step is to be able to call the ministry within the locality to let them know that we have a patient who is also tested positive for this coronavirus. Those are all extra steps that a medical lab technologist must do. So the last but not least, the doctor or the healthcare provider notify the patient of the results and recommend appropriate treatment. So the last step is that the doctor actually call the patients in and tell them whether they have the positive results, then the treatment plan that they have for them to go through that process. So in a nutshell, this is how this testing gets done in the lab. But thanks to technology, right now we have a little bit better technology where we are using right now. But even with that, with the volume and the mandate that we have to process across the lab, is still not enough. The new instrumentation that is in the market right now can able to process about 94 samples within every 4 hours. That's still quite low compared to the mandate that is set. 94 tests per 4 hours with this new instrumentation. So in an additional, you need a lot of this instrument to really buy to be able to process a better or more sample volumes for you to get your throughput and the mandate that is set by the government. So just to give you an idea what goes on behind the scene, that when your sample taken, it doesn't end up in the doctor's office or the collection center, but it's actually people behind the scene who is working hard 24 hours to make sure that your lab tests get results and also is on time and is precise and the quality is behind it. I had a friend that actually went to a place to get tested recently, and they told her that it would take 24 hours, but it actually took 3 days. So she called me and she was making all these complaints, and I was able to explain to her the precise and all the people that's behind the scene working 24 hours to making sure that her results get tested. We don't have enough instrument, not enough infrastructure in place, specifically in Canada I'm speaking about, and in Ontario. So we need the government to do more to really help put infrastructure in place and human resources in place so that we don't know when the next wave is coming. It could be a summer, winter, next month, a year or so. But once we are prepared, I know with the help of everyone, we'll be able to defeat the COVID-19, which is coronavirus.